Hi, welcome to Faith Imperfect with Jessica. This is Season 1, Episode 4 of The Chosen, the rock on which it is built. And again, I'm here with my sister Janice. She's joining me today too. Hi, Janice.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, if you haven't seen the episode yet, definitely going to be spoilers because I'm going to say whatever happens in the episode. And so if you don't want to hear those, go watch it first and then come back and listen to our episode. So in the opening scene, it's nighttime, and Simon is on a boat with Roman soldiers. So we saw at the end of episode 2, him and the soldiers standing on the shore, just kind of looking at the sea. Well, now they're on a boat together at night. Simon spots something in the water as they're out there, and he has them slow down, and he retrieves it, and it's a floating bobber. And he tells the Roman soldiers that they got to be close, and the Roman soldier says, like, good job. And you can tell he's contemplating, like his choices at that point, almost like having the Roman soldier tell him good job was like weird. And he notices that the bobber has a letter Z on it, and it kind of starts to look like he's deep in thought and he's looking around. So you're not really sure what he's going to do. So he has them turn the boat. And at one point you see him grab the side of the boat right before they hit a sandbar. So he planned that. So then you're like, oh. And then the soldiers all fall forward in their seated positions from the impact, and then the lead soldier gets mad and calls him a sand rat. So the next scene, they're on the shore. There's soldiers that are holding the arms of Simon as if they're arresting him. They're kind of holding him there. The lead soldier's upset with him, and he says that it wasn't an accident. And he draws his sword and he cuts Simon's left ear. He tells Simon that it was kindness, and that Quintus is going to be capable of savage violence toward people who betray him. So that's why he viewed it as kindness, because he all he did was cut his ear. The soldier punches him in the stomach and says that he has a week to make good on his promises and calls him a dog. The scene then ends with Simon by himself on the shore, yelling into the darkness while he holds his ear. The next scene is at that establishment/bar. I'll just call it the bar. But Simon is passing out drinks to a group of men, and he addresses one of them as Zebedee and thanks him for coming. They ask him about his ear, and he makes some kind of joke about running out of bait and deciding to use his ear, and everyone laughs. They ask him why they are all there, and he tells them that he made a deal with the Romans. They start to talk and groan. Someone says that Simon obviously didn't give them what they wanted, because of his ear. And he says, well, I owe a lot of taxes. And they're like, well, we all do. He's like, but they were going to take my house and my boat, and I wouldn't be able to pay the debt. They wanted me to give up the merchant fleet that was fishing on Shabbat. So Zebedee kind of starts to thank him for telling the truth, but he says that he's surprised that Simon would even show his face there and ask them to join him. So they're getting upset. They stand up. They're getting ready to leave. And Simon tells them that they were fishing the shore last night. And then they all sit back down, and Simon then puts the bobber on the table. So that Z that was on there was for Zebedee and his sons. So when Simon saw that on the boat, he knew that it was Zebedee. It was someone close to him. And I think that's why he probably changed his mind, because he didn't know who was out there before this. And then Simon tells them that he was with the Romans and they were right on their tails. And they ask him how he made it out of there. He tells them that he made an unfortunate accident happen and then lost part of his wife's favorite ear. So they're all trying to figure out what Simon's getting at. He tells them that he wants them to turn in their catch to him. He would then let Quintus know that the problem's taken care of, and then he tells them that they would have to stay off of the sea on Shabbat. So they all kind of laugh, and then Zebedee's like, well, thanks for not turning us in, but we can't take away from the fishermen. They had 40 fishermen with them that night. So even though it was only one night, technically it was like 40 catches. And so he didn't want to take away from the livelihood of their group.
I wanted to just go back before you went any further. Do you think, because when I watched it and he grabbed that lure that had the Z on it, I felt like he knew whose that was. And I felt like he was having second thoughts about trading in his own men. And that's why he veered the fishermen off. Is that correct?
That's what I'm thinking happened, because he must have known
Okay.
that the Z was Zebedee, because he
Right.
called that meeting with them at the bar. So I do
Okay.
think that because when he first picked it up, you're like, well, what is that? Is that a Z? Like, what does that mean? And we didn't know at the time when we first saw it, the bobber when he's holding it. But then you can tell the look on his face. And then he's looking
Yeah.
in the mist because it was like the scene showed like a fog on the water. So you really couldn't see what was going on and any further than the boat. And then he has them turn. And then the fact that he grabbed the side of the boat, you got the impression he was bracing himself, knowing they were going to hit a sandbar, you know? So I think you're right. Yeah, I think that is.
Yeah. I felt like he looked like all of a sudden very nervous and having second thoughts on what he was doing. And so
Mhm.
that's why I felt like, okay, he veered them off to get them off that path.
Yeah, I think so. It definitely
Yeah.
seemed like he looked deep in thought to me before we knew that it was Zebedee's bobber. So the next scene, Matthew is in Quintus's office. Quintus is going on about how immaculate the fruit is there. He says everything that grows here is immaculate except the people. He tells Matthew that they're a divided people. And actually, I was just listening to the roundtable discussion, and they were also trying to allude, like, not only are groups of people, like, you got like different types of Christians, right? Like we all believe in God, but we're different types of Christians that were divided. But they were also talking like back in those days that even like the Jewish churches were divided as well. But people also can be divided just even outside of religion. But he said they were kind of alluding to that fact that you had different types of groups of Jews that believed different things. So he claims to know a secret. He tells Matthew, I know a secret though. And you can see Matthew kind of lean in and he's like, I think that they'd want to be ruled by the Romans. So Quintus asks him where his escort is. And Matthew says, well, he thinks I'm going to get him killed due to my lack of social graces. So Quintus and the other soldier in the room both laugh. And Quintus tells him, oh, not today. Quintus says that he actually needs him for something. And he says, I want you to follow Simon and record everything that he does. It's where he goes, what he drinks. And he's like, well, I can't, I'm not, that's going to be very difficult because I'm not accepted. And he's like, well, what do you mean? He's like, they're jealous of you. And he's like, no, I'm hated. And he's like, well, then wear a disguise. But he tells him everyone hates tax collectors. Quintus then gives him a notebook and says, write everything down. And Quintus asks him if his booth is protected, and he tells him that yes, his dog protects it. So then Quintus is like, of course you have a dog. And then him and the other soldier laugh, and he tells him that he's a priceless treasure. So that was a fairly positive scene for Quintus.
Yeah. And I wanted to add that Matthew seems to be very nonchalant and confident when he's going in front of Quintus, like he doesn't understand what the consequences could be, almost in an uneducated way. I don't think he realizes like what could happen if he crosses Quintus or doesn't do what he says. Do you get that feeling from Matthew that he's just kind of,
Well, I didn't want to interrupt you. I was thinking oblivious. Like for some reason, he is
yes,
oblivious to.
because he just kind of strutted in that scene like, I'm just going to go talk to Quintus and that's that. And even his bodyguard, he even waited outside.
Yeah, that's where he was
He,
talking about his escort. He called him the escort,
yes,
but
the
the soldier
escort.
that would stand at his booth that normally escorted him just stayed outside. It's like, I'm not going to be any part of this.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
very interesting. It almost
Yeah.
makes you wonder if people are watching it and they see the way Matthew's very well groomed and well dressed, you would get the idea that he's very educated. But I almost second guess that, because you
Well,
would
it's like
think he'd
he's
be
book
more
smart.
scared.
It's like
Yes.
he's book smart, but not street smart.
Yes. Yeah. Good way to put it.
Yeah, because even with Gaius was the one who was escorting him the last couple times, and Gaius was saying so many times trying to forewarn him, and it still seems like even with all those warnings, he still goes in there like that. Because even when you remember when he started to say, "Well, that's going to prove very challenging what you're asking me to do," and you could tell Quintus was getting fired up and was getting in his face, and the soldier was looking like he was going to draw his sword. But then Matthew explains, well, you were born Roman. I chose to be with you guys, so I'm hated more than the Romans are. And
Right.
so a lot of that could have been taken very personal, and they probably could have hurt him or done something to him, but they didn't. I guess Quintus does value that he needs him. He needs his keen observation. So the next scene you see is all the Pharisees, and they're talking with Nicodemus. They're telling him about a scene by the Jordan River. There was a long line of people that were waiting to be immersed, and it's not for purification. So if somebody needed to be purified, they'd go in the river. And they're like, no. They're telling him that there was a loud man who wore camel hair, and they said that the person was calling it a baptism for repentance of sin, forgiveness of sin. Nicodemus asked him if they had ever seen the man before, and I don't remember. I think it might have been Shmuel that was talking about it, but he was like, no. And Nicodemus asked a lot of other questions, including what was his message? Was he calling for a revolution? Was he calling for violence? And they said no. And the Pharisees said that the worst part of it was that he called the religious leaders snakes. And they said that he was acting like a madman, going on how the Pharisees were worthless. And so they discuss how he's preaching like a populist message. He's telling taxpayers and soldiers not to extort people for more money than what they're supposed to. Like if they owe taxes, don't add on it. And then the soldiers to not be taking money from people that they shouldn't be taking. And for the commoners to share their food and clothing with those that are in need. So then Nicodemus is like deep in thought, and he's like, oh, well, when I was in Jerusalem, I heard about this wild man who entered the king's court and had a list of evils that were done by Herod Antipas and his family. And the Pharisees asked Nicodemus, well, what should we do? Should we bring him in for questioning? And Nicodemus says that if it's the same person, he doesn't answer to the Sanhedrin and that they aren't his only targets. He goes on to say that this person rejects tradition and anyone with influence. So Nicodemus asks them if he performs miracles. He asked, is there like a rumor that he performs miracles too? And they were like, no, I don't think so.
I wanted to say that this scene kind of confused me because it didn't show what they were all talking about. And I know that there's going to be a lot of that where they're just talking about things that have happened that we're not actually seeing. So I didn't really understand that scene, especially when Nicodemus made a comment about he wanted to talk to this person. He wanted to question this person. Um, and I thought, well, where'd all this come from? Because I don't even remember like a scene being
Mm-hmm.
in there that any of this happened.
Yeah, well, they didn't, not yet. And there's going to be some stuff that will allude to it. And that's why I had debated on explaining a little bit of the backstory without giving away too much. So, one of the things right off the bat, just him asking about miracles. We haven't gotten to the end of the episode yet, so you can't include anything from this episode. What was the miracle we've seen so far?
Lilith turning into Mary.
Yeah. So, he's kind of on this search for like, well, who was it? Who was it? Right. So to
Right.
me, when he asks, do they say he performs miracles? I'm wondering, is he thinking that it's this guy that was at the river? And as the episode goes on, they do say his name is John. And they say his name is John the Baptizer. So he's referred to as the Baptizer because he was in the river trying to baptize these people. And these people were all in line waiting to get baptized. And that's where the Pharisees saw him and said that he called them snakes.
Okay. Is that why they arrested him? Because he was baptizing?
Well, they're not supposed to. It's got to be the Romans would have had to confiscate him for some reason. And I don't know if we ever find that out. I know we didn't get to that point yet. I don't want to give away too much about what's going to come still. So it does kind of,
Right.
we do find out more. So for people who don't know more of it, there's more to the story that they will reveal. Now, I guess I could say that this person that's the baptizer, they're calling him John the Baptizer. He was known in that community at that time. Like it said, he was wearing camel hair, which had to be so itchy and uncomfortable. I couldn't imagine having an outfit made of camel hair. And he would eat locusts. So he was kind of a unique individual. He was out in the wilderness wearing this camel hair and eating honey and locusts. And so yeah, not something I'd want to be eating. So he was unique, but now he was baptizing people in the river and stuff. So his name was getting around. And obviously Nicodemus had heard about him in Jerusalem as well. And they're thinking it's the same person that went to Herod and his family and listed all these evils they were doing as things against like what God, what God would will. So yeah, I think that him asking, did he perform miracles? Like he's thinking maybe this guy could have had something to do with Lilith, but that's really the only thing I think that it was alluded to. So in the next scene, we see Simon walking into his house, and you find Eden there talking with her two brothers. Simon says that if it's about the docks, it's just business, which Eden's like, well, what are you talking about? So it's obviously not about the docks. And he doesn't tell her the truth. He says that he lost his lure. And then he finds out that the brothers are there because Eden's mom is sick, and now she's living at their house. So she's in Simon and Eden's house. You hear her coughing in the background. Eden plans on taking care of her, and she's upset because he hasn't gone to see her mom in over a month. Like with everything going on, he's been super distracted, so he didn't even know that she wasn't doing well. So Simon tries to tell everyone there that this is a bad time. No, she can't stay here. The brothers start to argue with him and they get in his face. They're all kind of yelling at each other. And then Eden yells for all of them to stop. And she says, if my husband says this, then he's got a good reason. Although she says that, he says it's not a good time, but that's just for him. She pretty much tries to get the brothers to stop, but then Simon asks the brothers to leave so that they can talk. So then he fesses up to Eden about everything that's been going on, that he doesn't have it, because in the last episode, he's like, I got this. He doesn't have it. He tells her, we have tax debt. I've been fishing on Shabbat to try to pay for it. He says that they're in trouble and they could lose the house. And he tells her about the cut on his ear being by the Romans. He says that they need a miracle. He says that if he doesn't catch a lot of fish, they're going to arrest him. And she says, they're going to kill you. And he tells her that he needs to go and spend every day this week to try fishing to get as many fish as he can to pay the debt. So he tells her not to keep her mom there because she can't do it alone. And she says, like, don't tell me what I can and can't do. She tells him that God is with her even when Simon isn't. She asks him where his faith is and that he hasn't had faith for a long time and that he keeps trying to fix everything himself instead of relying on God. She tells him that the man she married used to pursue God regularly, and that is why he's stuck now in this situation. She tells him to go. She doesn't want him there for the night anyway, and then tells him that she's glad that he was honest, but she doesn't want to talk anymore. So she tells him that maybe God can get his attention now. So he leaves the house and is mad. He's kicking something, and then his brother Andrew runs up.
I found it very interesting how Eden talks to Simon because I have this vision in my head that back in the day, women obeyed their husbands. They didn't talk back. They were, they weren't supposed to speak unless they were spoken to. And maybe it was different at this time, but I guess I just remember that shocking me that she would yell at everybody to be quiet and then tell Simon, um, I know you're sorry, but I don't want to talk to you right now. Leave. That just seems like a lot of disrespect, I guess, maybe from the wife to the husband. If you're looking at the whole big picture of how things were back in the day, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. On everything I've looked at, like that hasn't come up at all with all the different Bible studies. It's a good point, though. It's a neat observation I didn't even think about, but it definitely makes her a strong character. Now, she's not a character in the Bible. We know he's married, but because in the Bible they do talk about the mother-in-law, and so you know that he's married. I think they might have mentioned one other time just that he's married, and there's a story around the mother-in-law. But other than that, we don't know anything else about the wife. So it is kind of interesting that she's such a strong character. And it makes me kind of wonder, I wonder why they did do that. But maybe because I feel like this episode, and it happens again later, people are questioning his faith. She's questioning his faith. Someone else will question his faith. And so maybe they just needed her to be a stronger character for that reason. I don't know.
Yeah.
So when he is out the door, as soon as he gets out the door and he's kicking something, almost immediately his brother Andrew shows up and he's running up to him and he tells him that he has seen the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. He says, we're saved. And he says that he saw the Messiah and that John the Baptist, and I put in parentheses, the camel hair guy baptizing people in the river, pointed to him. So Andrew says that it's the Messiah and that they have been praying for him all their lives. Simon asks if he was a big guy, or was he rich, or was he a doctor? And Andrew says no. And then Simon's like, then he can't help with their problems. He's like, just because creepy John pointed at someone, which I had to quote that because I thought it was hilarious. that they call him Creepy John. So Simon goes on to say that he has lost everything and he's burnt every bridge. So a lot of his relationships, he's screwed those up. Andrew tells him that it doesn't matter now, and the Romans don't matter. If it's the Messiah and he's arrived, that anything is possible. So Simon said that that would be nice, but then he still just like heads out to fish. And you see that Andrew's kind of like, he doesn't know what to say. He just kind of stands there. So then you see Matthew in the street. And I had to laugh because it's obvious that he's there. He's in this awkward posture. He's like trying to hide, but he's standing in the middle of the street. So even though he's obvious, Simon realizes he's being followed because it's so obvious. And he calls him out on it and they have a short conversation. And Matthew tells him to turn himself in, the fisherman or the money that he owes, square up his debt. And Simon tells him that anything is possible. And Matthew says that he doesn't think it's mathematically possible and that he'd be prolonging the anguish of his family. Simon tells him that he uses a lot of big words. And I paraphrased what Matthew had told him, but he was using a lot of large vocabulary. And then Matthew acknowledges that no one listens to him like they do Simon. He tells Simon that he has a singular talent.
That was funny. I agree with you. How Matthew was trying to hide, but he was like in plain sight. I did want to back up a little bit though. I think Andrew is very shocked. So it doesn't seem like Simon doesn't have much faith left, is what I'm noticing a lot in this episode. Um, he doesn't want to hear anything about the sightings of the Messiah. He doesn't care to hear any of Andrew's stories. I think that's why Andrew's looking at him just kind of in disbelief, like, what happened to you, my brother? You have to believe, and he's just not believing.
Yeah, that's a good point too. But with Eden, because she vocalizes it, but that's a good point that Andrew's seeing it too.
Yes.
So then Simon tells him, I'm going fishing. And Matthew says, does it change anything to know that you only have till sunup? And Simon's like, what? Shabbat is not for 3 days. So Simon was thinking he had till at least Shabbat. Like, I don't know if they were planning on going out on the sea again with the Romans to turn in the fleet or what, and that he was going to just try to have the money by then. But Matthew tells him that Quintus is convinced that Simon double-crossed him and that he's coming. So Simon says he's still going to go fishing. He says, if I'm going to go down, it's going to be for what God built me to do. And so he says, tell your boss that he can come get me off the water. So the next scene, we see Nicodemus and his wife. And he's telling his wife that they're going to stay another fortnight. Now, I kind of had to laugh because I know the kids play a Fortnite game. And I'm like, what is a fortnight? And I thought it was just going to be like a dark night, right? And so I looked it up, and actually a fortnight is considered 2 weeks or 14 days. So he tells his wife that they're going to stay for another fortnight or until his research is finished. And she was kind of talking right before that, like, oh, our trip has been so good. It's going to be nice to get back. Like you could tell she was thinking they were done. And so she isn't happy that she's got to stick around there some more. She was thinking it was the end of their trip, not that they were going to be there another 2 weeks. So they get interrupted by somebody knocking at the door, and it turns out to be Joseph, one of the Pharisees. Joseph tells him that John the Baptizer has been taken into custody by the Romans. Joseph said he knows this because he's pretty sure that Shmuel told the Romans where John was. Nicodemus says that they don't lightly turn Jews over to the Romans. So even if they didn't agree with something somebody did, they don't just regularly turn them over to the Romans. He asks if the Sanhedrin had ordered it, and Joseph says no. And then Nicodemus says that he wants to question the baptizer himself and discuss it with Shmuel himself. So I think he doesn't want Joseph going to Shmuel about it. So the next scene, Simon is on his boat at night. He's repeatedly casting his nets, retrieving empty nets, getting frustrated. He yells into the night. You see Matthew and his dog. They're sitting on the dune of the shore. And the dog whines in response to Simon's yelling. And I thought that was cute. That's why I wrote this part down, that Matthew signals for the dog to stop, and it does. And then he tells the dog that people bark sometimes too. I thought that was a cute part of the scene.
Me too. I liked that.
And then you see him, now he's sitting in the boat. He's kind of, I don't know if his nets are still in the water or not. But he's talking to God, and he's saying, he was quoting a part from the Bible, but then turns it into this big monologue. He says, and I will make your descendants as many as the stars in heaven. And then what, huh? Make the chosen as many as the stars, only to let Egypt enslave us for generations. Bring us out of Egypt, part the Red Sea, only to let us wander in the desert for 40 years. Give us the land, only to be exiled in Babylon. Bring us back, only to be crushed by Rome. He says, This is the God I've served faithfully my entire life. You're the God I'm supposed to thank. So he's continuing to yell these questions at God, and then he hears Andrew say, Simon. And it turns out that Andrew, Zebedee, and his sons, James and John, all show up to help Simon. Andrew asks him who he's talking to, and he says, apparently no one. One of the guys makes a comment that your friends might think you've lost faith. So again, here they're alluding to that he lost his faith. Zebedee jokes around and says, I heard you need a real fisherman. And so they go on to say that Eden might be angry, but she's not too proud to ask for help. So that's why they're all there. So she must have asked, hey, can you help Simon? So they ask Simon if he told her the whole story and how she took it. And he says, well, let me just say, it's my last night as a free man and I'm fishing. And so Andrew says, last night, because he thought the same thing, that he still had a couple more days. And Simon tells him, Quintus. So they all look at each other. And then Zebedee says, well, we only have a few hours left. Let's fish. So you see the scenes, they're casting nets, retrieving them, they're empty. The guys are telling them different things, like maybe you and Eden can move to Egypt, and maybe you can do these different things. And he says he's hoping that if he lets the Romans rough him up a little bit, he'll be able to have visitors. So Andrew proceeds to try to tell Simon about what happened with John the Baptizer again. And Simon stops him and says, not another word from you about this lamb of yours. We don't need a lamb, we need fish. So that's in one of the scenes you were referring to where he's stopping him from talking about it again.
Right. Yeah. And I think then he's showing Zebedee and his sons as well that he's losing his faith because he doesn't want to talk about it. Simon is just not acting like he has his faith anymore. And I think a lot more people are seeing it. His wife sees it, his brother sees it, Zebedee and his sons see it because he doesn't want to talk about any of that.
In that scene, it seemed like the sons had a look on their face, and I wasn't sure how to interpret it, if they were as if they had already had encounters with Jesus, or they were just, maybe they were just reacting to his response. I'm not sure. So the next scene, it's dawn. It's starting to get light out. Sun's starting to come up. The guys look like they're half asleep, hanging onto the sides of the boats. Andrew's telling him maybe he can hide in the caravan. And he says maybe he can have John the Baptist create him a disguise out of camel hair, which I thought was kind of funny. They're putting their nets in, and they're finding that the nets are still empty. And you can tell that they're all very frustrated. And I think Zebedee says that sometimes the sea defeats everybody. Simon says that it's time to be done. They start heading toward the shore, and they see a group on the shore. So one of them says, Roman scum couldn't even wait. And Zebedee reassures Simon that we're all with you, like we're going to stay with you. So Simon tells Andrew to make sure that Eden is safe. So they pan over to Matthew, and you see Matthew and his dog watching this group that they were seeing from afar. And then you see that it's a group of people listening to Jesus talk, and they're all sitting on the shore. So one of Zebedee's sons realizes as they get closer that those aren't soldiers. So he says, those aren't soldiers. So Simon's like, oh, I might still have time to go see Eden. So the two groups separate their boats because they had linked their boats up together with wood as if it's one big ship. And then as Andrew and Simon are nearing the shore with their boat, Andrew tells Simon, that's him, it's him. And Andrew starts saying that it's the man that John the Baptizer was talking about, who says that he was the Lamb of God. And so Jesus asks Andrew and Simon, can I stand on your boat so the crowd can hear me? And Andrew's acting funny, and he's like, yes, yes, please stand on our boat. And Simon's giving him a weird look like, what, what's going on with you? And so Simon tells Jesus that I need to go. I'm sorry. I need to go. I have no time for this today. And Jesus tells him to stay for a few minutes longer and that he has something for him. Simon continues to say that he has things to do, and Jesus just says to allow a few moments, please. And then you hear Andrew say that this man is the Messiah. And so then Jesus acknowledges Andrew and says, nice to see you again, Andrew. And then he introduces himself to Simon as Jesus. Jesus starts to tell a parable about fishing. He asks, what does a net do? And Simon says that it gathers fish. And then Jesus says, all kinds of fish. And Jesus says that the kingdom of heaven is like what happens next. He says, after the net is full, Simon and the others will draw it to shore, sit down, and sort out the fish. The good fish will go into barrels, and the bad fish get thrown away. He says, "So it will be at the end of the age. Angels will come and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into a fiery furnace." So he continues to say that therefore every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven, like you are all now, is like the master of a house who brings forth his treasures, both old and new. He tells them that you are to do the same with the knowledge. Jesus then says, "These parables I tell you will make sense to some, but not to others." He tells them that that's all for today and that he has business with his new friend. So most of the people leave, and then you see Mary and a friend of hers still standing on the shore. Jesus tells them to cast their nets, and Simon tells him they've been fishing all night and nothing. Jesus then stares at him, and he nods. And then Simon says, "At your word." Him and Andrew cast the net out. Simon gives Jesus a nod like, "See, I told you." And then Jesus nods back at him and kind of raises his eyebrows. It's kind of a funny look between the two. Then the boat starts to creak and tip toward the side of the cast net, and Simon and Andrew are struggling, and you see a lot of bubbles of activity in the water's surface, and then they start yelling to Zebedee's boat as they're saying, "Help!" So Zebedee and his sons jump off of their boat, and they run over there and they help try pulling this net up, and the net is completely filled, and the fish completely fill the boat. Everyone's laughing, and Simon looks at Andrew in disbelief, and Andrew says, "I told you." And then Matthew's on the shore, and he stands up in disbelief at what he's seeing. So Mary's standing on the shore, and she's crying with the two other friends, actually, instead not just one. And they have shocked looks too. So Jesus just smiles, and they're all rejoicing. And Simon and Andrew have to actually hop off of the boat because it's starting to tip.
You said something that I feel goofy that I didn't notice. I didn't notice that Mary was on the beach. So that's very
Yeah.
interesting because they all got up and some of them kind of walked away, but very few stayed to watch what was happening. Um, Gosh, I guess I didn't realize that that was Mary. Was she wearing like one of those headdress type veils? Maybe I
Yeah.
didn't recognize her. Okay.
Yeah, she did. She was standing there. And what's interesting about it too, and they talked about it on the round table a little bit, is that, I would consider this a miracle. In the Bible, it says that the first miracle, which we're going to see in the next episode, that was supposed to be the first public miracle and that multiple people would have known about. So technically they think maybe chronologically, because this scene does happen in the Bible where it's not necessarily that Simon's not in this critical spot where he's like, I need all this money, or I need to pay a debt, but they are all out all night fishing, and they come in from fishing and they caught nothing, and Jesus stands on their boat and then does tell them to cast the nets, and then they're filled, and they actually say in the Bible that it fills 2 boats worth, but but it didn't allude that anybody else was necessarily watching that, so we wonder if that happens actually later and doesn't happen right off the bat. Regardless, they never said that other people witnessed it, but somebody had to have witnessed it to put it in the Bible. So when they get to the shore, Simon jumps off the boat and immediately drops to his knees and puts his head down in front of Jesus. He says, "My brother and the baptizer." He's like, and then he trails off and he says, "You are the Lamb of God, yes?" And then he starts to look up at Jesus, who responds with, "I am." Simon says, "Depart from me. I'm a sinful man. You don't know what I am. You don't know who I am and the things I've done." Jesus responds, "Don't be afraid, Simon." Simon responds with, "I'm sorry. We waited for you so long. We believed, but my faith, I'm sorry." And then Jesus says, "Lift up your head, fisherman." So Simon then looks up slowly, and they look at each other, and Simon asks, crying, "What do you want from me? Anything you ask, I will do." So then Jesus comes down to be eye level with him, kind of like what you would do with a little kid, and he tells him, "Follow me." And Simon responds, "I will."
I really liked this part. Maybe I'm emotional. I was very emotional when I watched it because throughout the whole episode, you just really see that Simon is losing his faith and doesn't want to hear about anything from anybody. And then when this happens, it was like a miracle. He knew that this was going to save him. He was no longer going to be in trouble with the tax collectors or with Quintus or worried about what was going to happen to him or his family. Very strong, very emotional scene. I loved it. They couldn't have done any better.
Yeah, I thought so too. I really liked it, and even when I'm reading it back, I was like, "Okay, don't get teary eyed."
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, "Hold it together, Janice."
Yeah. Yeah, because it was very powerful the way they did it too, and just the way he just completely just dropped. And yeah, I couldn't even imagine ever being face to face
And
with
I think
Jesus.
that's what got me because I knew what was coming as soon as he dropped to his knees and was like almost asking for forgiveness. You don't know what I've done. What do you want from me? That kind of thing. You knew what was going to happen. You knew that Jesus was going to just forgive him. And it was emotional.
Yeah, it was so when he says, "I will follow you," and Andrew jumps off the boat and stands next to Simon and addresses him as rabbi, teacher, Jesus looks over to James and John, which are the sons of Zebedee on the other boat, and says, "You as well." And James and John both look at each other like, "Well, which one of us?" They don't say that, but Jesus says, "Yes, you, James and John, come follow me." And so they start to, but then they stop and look at their father, who then nods and says that he'll take care of the fish. He'll take the fish to the market and get Simon's debt all squared up. And he says that he'll get help with the boats. And they're still unsure about leaving him. And he says, "Go." And then they ask, "What about Ema," which is their mother? And Zebedee replies, "You've just been called by the man we've prayed for our entire lives. And you ask me, what will I say when you miss supper? Go now." So they take off with Jesus, their father standing at the water's edge, smiling. So that made me smile too, thinking, it's cool that their dad was so supportive and didn't try to hold them back, you know?
Absolutely.
So you see them all walking with Jesus, and Simon is asking him if he's sure he doesn't need to do that again and that they make a great team on the boat. Now, I don't think that part's in the Bible, but it's funny. Like, let's go
Yeah.
back out there and fish some more. Imagine the fish we could
Yeah.
catch. Jesus tells him that fish are nothing, that you have much bigger things ahead of you, Simon, son of Jonah. He says, "Did you understand the parable I told earlier? From now on, I'm going to make you fishers of men, and you are to gather as many as possible, all kinds, and I will sort them out later." So the group has left with Jesus. Now you see Zebedee securing the boat. Matthew's walking up and he's looking at the contents of the boat. And Matthew says that catch is worth a lot. And Zebedee laughs and says, "It's amazing." And Matthew responds with, "It's impossible." And you can tell that he's really deep in thought. He looks confused, like, what did I just see? So that's where that scene ends at the water. And then the next scene, you're in a really dark room. You just barely see light, like coming out from like a crack of a door. There's a door opening. It's a small crack of light coming through, and you see a silhouette of bars and a man's profile within the bars, so you can tell it's somebody in jail. And at the door, you can see a Roman soldier opening the door. And then in walks Nicodemus. So Nicodemus walks in by himself, no one walks in with him. And the person inside the jail that's dark says, "You're supposed to be the powerful one, yet you're more frightened here than I am." And Nicodemus says, "Are you the one they call John the Baptizer?" And the man gets up and walks to the bars. The light's shining on him, but he's still mostly in the dark, but now you can kind of see his eyes and his face. And he says, "Yes." And then Nicodemus has a shaky breath and he's like, "I have questions for you about miracles." So now you see John's face and his eyes get real big. And then he starts to smile. And then that's where the scene ends.
So I'm hoping that the next episode starts where we left off on that because I'm curious. Because at
Mm-hmm.
first I felt like when Nicodemus asked him if he was John the Baptizer, I kind of felt like John looked at him like inquisitively, like, "Am I? Is that what people call me?" Did you get that feeling or no?
Hmm.
Because I felt like he kind of looked at Nicodemus like, um, okay. Like he didn't realize that that's what people called him.
That's very possible. You know, I didn't catch that, but that's actually pretty good. I wonder if he did know right off the bat. It might have taken a little while before people would have, I didn't notice
It
it.
almost makes me want to watch that scene back just to see if I'm remembering it correctly. I don't know.
Yeah. I usually watch the round table after the episode, and Dallas was sitting with his three experts again. The Catholic priest said that the portrayal of Simon Peter, whatever you want to call him, is challenging. They think that it would have been more gradual, like that this idea of him gambling, fishing on Shabbat, collaborating with Romans, and then all of a sudden now he's taking on following Jesus, that they think it would have been a lot more of a gradual thing and not as sharp of a turn. So they said that they think that he was already would have been on this trajectory toward God, and that something would have happened that would have allowed him to make the commitment, but that this series could be stretching our notions about who the apostles were. So that could be like a good thing, I guess, like to think outside the box a little bit about who these people really were. Dallas said that he did agree that Simon and Peter for sure would have been on a slow trajectory meeting the Messiah, but that they wanted to make it like he was so desperate, having this backslide, being under pressure by the Romans and everything he was going through, that in the it shows that anytime he did something, he would almost immediately regret his actions. So there's things that happen later on with Jesus that he will blurt something out or he would do something and then immediately have regrets. They wanted to kind of show that side too. So Simon was so shameful after Jesus did the miracle of the fish that Dallas thought it could be plausible that there were other circumstances that were going on because he was in the Bible story. They were fishing at night. Jesus came and said, "Can I stand on your boat?" Then he told him to cast his nets, and then they had all these fish. They didn't go into any kind of backstory. So Dallas is like, well, maybe there could have been something more to it as far as why that, he would have had such a drastic response to Jesus being there. But part of me also thinks like, well, maybe we just don't know because we've never like encountered Jesus standing next to us, but maybe all of us would, you know what I mean? Maybe just that's how Jesus was. I wonder if he walked up to any of us, if he would just know and just drop to our knees and be like, I'm so sorry for everything I've done. Like maybe that would just be a natural reaction, but I don't know. So the Jewish rabbi said that Peter was an observant, pious Jew, that Peter met Jesus already. Now, in this account, he was called to follow Jesus. So, back in those times, things were so bad that people were desperate and they were awaiting the Messiah. And they did have the impression that the Messiah was going to be this person that was going to conquer like the Roman army. But they did think that they did say that they thought that he had already met him, but then there was like another instance that now he's being called to follow him. Dallas said that he identified with the scene where Simon was asking God questions and crying out, like the scene at night on the boat. The evangelical theologian thought that the scene showed his faith, that even though you could say that he didn't have faith, the fact that he's calling out to God and asking these questions, he had many strains and God hadn't showed up yet, so he was like calling out to him kind of thing. So he said it's debatable which scripture between John and Luke happened first. So the gospels aren't in order all the time, and so they were just giving highlights in each gospel. So the some think that Simon met Jesus already before the boat. In John, it says that the miracle that we're going to see in this next scene was the first public miracle. So there's a debate as if the boat and the calling of Simon might have happened after this next episode, but they still did it in this order. So I just wanted to mention that it's not a huge deal, but they think they might have been flip-flopped. Like maybe episode 5 should have been episode 4 and episode 4 should have been 5, but they did point out too there was a lot of miracles that Jesus did do when he was here, and they're not all written down. So the evangelical theologian also said that Simon shouldn't be in episode 5 because of this whole thing about the time frames. He said good stories and good dramas have to be redemptive, so he thought that this episode was wonderfully told. And when we encounter Jesus at a low point, it's the most discomforting, but also the most joyous. So they showed that really well in this episode.
I agree with that. I feel like they did very good on that episode. It was very well put together.
Yeah. So they talked a little bit about the huge ornate cathedrals in the Catholic Church. The priest said that they want to tell the story and experience the transcendent. I looked it up, and transcendent means something that surpasses ordinary limits. It excels beyond the normal experience or extends beyond human understanding. So they also want people to feel small in the church, which I thought was kind of interesting. So with all that, they were talking about, the cathedrals are meant so that you look up. You're looking up. And so Dallas was like, well, this is one of the things I wanted. This scene, I wanted Simon to be looking up at Jesus. So then when Jesus comes down to his level, he says when he actually, I guess that was something that Jonathan, the actor who played Jesus, just decided to do when they were filming, and they kept it in there because he said he loved that. He said, when I saw him come down to his level, he's like, I cried. So even the director was moved by that act of Jesus coming down to Simon's level. So Dallas said that when he would walk into a Catholic church, it felt so large that it felt impersonal to him. And he asked, what do they do? He says everyone does it in their own way to make it feel personal. So the Catholic priest said that people will find a space or a place, but that the communal aspect is what's important too, receiving communion. In this episode, they talk also about John the Baptizer calling the religious leaders snakes. The Sadducees and the Pharisees were getting a bad rap. And they always have actually got a bad rap. At least I know, even going to our church, I would hear stuff like VBS songs. There's a VBS song that talks about the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and it talks about like being hypocrites and stuff. I don't even remember what the song was called. I'd have to actually look it up, but this series helps to show that there were good ones and bad ones. So some of the differences, I never knew what a Sadducee was. So a Sadducee was responsible for like the temple and the tabernacle, like the writings. They were the elite of the day. They weren't connected to the people. They were like kept separate because it's almost like they were trying to stay holier and they couldn't be with the people, or they didn't want to be. I'm not really sure exactly. And then the Pharisees were more of the teachers in the synagogues. They were highly respected. They were the everyday exposure to the word for people. Dallas wanted to be careful not to set any kind of stereotypes about those groups, because he knows in the evangelical world, and I know even like, I've been going to a Lutheran church, the Sadducees and the Pharisees are all portrayed as hypocrites, but not all of them were. What they were discussing is that there was a few select elite ones that gave a bad name to the rest. So they were typically opposite of that and teaching not to be hypocrites. I think with every group you're going to have, and you're always going to have somebody that's going to give a bad name for the rest. They were discussing a lot about how they got a bad rap. So those were the main key things I had written down for the episode.
I do want to say it's kind of neat that you listen to the round table and then get everybody else's perspective too. It's almost kind of like they're talking about it like we are. But
Mhm.
it's nice to hear like their points of views and why the director did this or that, and just the points of views of
Yeah.
other people. I like hearing that, so I'm glad that you have incorporated that into your episodes.
Yeah, I found it interesting. I just happened on one of them one time and I was like, "Oh, these are interesting." And they are literally sitting around a table and just talking. I think later ones, they look like they might be in a building or something, a different room where it's not around a table, but they're sitting at like a kitchen counter or something. But I just thought that it was interesting. And sometimes there's some neat stuff that they say and I was like, "Oh, I didn't know this or that," and it kind of just, I feel like it just broadens the study on it a little bit more.
So far, in two of the episodes, we're seeing kind of a big miracle. Like with Lilith, aka Mary, and then the fish. They fished all night. They couldn't catch anything. And then all of a sudden they have a boat full of fish. So it's exciting to know. And I know that they'll never be able to, they wouldn't have the time to explain every miracle that Jesus performed for everybody. But it's very interesting, the ones that we are seeing. So I'm very intrigued by that.
This one study guide says, "What quote from this episode was the most meaningful or impactful to you and why?"
I can say this, and I don't really know if it would be like a quote, but when Simon was at his knees in front of Jesus on the beach and said, "What do you want from me?" And Jesus said, "Follow me." I'm going to give you my perspective of it, which shocked me later because it was nothing of, they actually followed him. I took that like they want them to follow him in his beliefs and his faith and think, like more of a self-conscious type follow me, not like follow me, we're going to go over here. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think it's actually both. I mean, because
Right,
no, I know he says that, but like you could take it in multiple ways. Like, okay, well, what does follow me
right,
mean? Like, yeah, and I think by them following with him, but they're going to be like in it, not just, oh, I'm going to meet up with you every now and then and hear what you have to say about this stuff. I'm going to follow you. Like, I'm going to be camping out with you. I'm going to be, you know, I mean,
right,
yeah, but I
right.
guess at that point you really don't know. That's the thing, is they probably had no clue. That's a good point, actually. that they probably had no clue what that entailed. Where's this journey gonna take us? What's this
Yes.
gonna look like? But we're gonna follow him blindly. And there's a lot of stories in the Bible where God says, "Go here or go there," and people have no clue, and that's gotta be scary. I would hope I'd be that faithful, but I know that there's times where we're reluctant to do stuff because we're scared about what's gonna happen, and they just blindly were gonna follow him because their faith was there.
Mhm.
So I did wanna read this because I think this is what the scene actually looks like from the Bible. It says Jesus calls his first disciples. So it's Matthew 4, verse 18. It says, "As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. 'Come follow me,' Jesus said, 'and I will send you out to fish for people.' At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two brothers, James the son of Zebedee and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him." Now I thought that was I was hoping that was the one with the fish. Let me see here. So that they think that that happened separate, but they're not really sure if it happened separate from this miracle with the fish. Okay, so here's the one it says this is Luke now. So you had the version from Matthew, now the version from Luke. So these different disciples or the people who wrote these are different witnesses to what happened. And so now you're hearing another version. So one day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, this is Luke 5. The people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge two boats, left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. They came and filled both boats so full they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on the shore, left everything, and followed him. So a lot of those phrases from the movie were like direct from the Bible. So I thought that's cool. I love when they
Absolutely.
do that. So there's a lot we have talked about that wasn't, they filled in little things, but I love it when there's actually stuff where I look it up like, "Oh my gosh, that's like word for word, it's in the Bible." Now he just tells Simon, "Don't be afraid," and then later says in the scene, but in the Bible, it's right after it. He says, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." So I just thought that was cool.
Does he mean that, like, he wants Simon to, like, help others to follow him, to follow Jesus?
Yeah.
And that's what he means by fishing for people?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, in the Bible, it's funny too because I have heard of this before, but I didn't really look into it maybe a year or 2 ago, so I feel silly saying it, but maybe I shouldn't, I guess I'll just put it out there because there's probably other people that feel the same way. I kept hearing the Great Commission, that God gave us the Great Commission, and I'm like, "What are they talking about?" And I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't and so I over time, I learned that the Great Commission is there's a part of the Bible where Jesus says that we are to fish for people. We are to gather as many believers and spread the word. And that's the Great Commission. That's like the one thing before he left that he said we need to do. We need to spread the gospel, which is the good news that Jesus died for our sins and rose and everything and conquered death for us. And to bring in more believers and to grow the church. And that's the Great Commission. And I was like, and I didn't know that. I never had heard that before. So I just thought it was really interesting. And so this is all setting this up. This is all like the preliminary of what is gonna lead to, and no one at the time knew that Jesus was gonna end up on the cross and everything, like they didn't know that, but because they all misinterpreted the Bible the Old Testament, as in the Messiah that's going to come is going to be this like military guy, and he's going to defeat them. Okay, he's going to defeat, but not the Romans. He's going to defeat like death and sin.
Mhm. Yeah. Mm. I'm
Yeah.
excited for the next
I know,
episode.
I know. So the next episode is episode 5, and it's called The Wedding Gift. And so that's a good one too.
Makes you wonder who's gonna get married.
Yeah, and then what the wedding will be like and stuff too, because it's like it is a different time frame. And I will say we get to meet Mary, the mother of Jesus. I love the actor that plays her too. Like there's some really good actors in this series, so I'm super
Nice.
excited about some of the episodes to come. Okay, so we'll end in prayer. Dear God, thank you for everything you do for us. Help us keep our faith strong and keep you in our sights. Thank you for everything you do and all the blessings you give. Amen.
Amen.